And just like that, 2025 is done for the Canadian men's national team. So a very simple question here. How are you feeling at this group as the year comes to an end, Oliver?
I think I'm feeling cautiously optimistic about next summer with some reservations and some concerns still there that you'd like to see a bit of progress on in the new year. I'll start with the positive. Like this team is very hard to score against, and therefore they are very hard to beat. You know, they've lost 2 games this year. They've only conceded 1 goal in their past 6 matches. It's been a pretty remarkable run in that regards, and even more so when you think that back four that Jesse Marsch, relied upon for so long early in his tenure, 3 of them have spent long periods of this year out injured, right? So you would not have expected the defensive solidity that they've shown. And I think it's been the back four. It's been players like Joel Walterman, Richie Laryea, Nico Seeger really stepping up and I think strengthening their cases. But it's also the entire team, front to back. I think they just, work very hard. They are organized. They're difficult to play against and difficult to beat. So that's a big positive, and I think that can be a very good starting point next summer. The more negative side for me is in possession. Like I still think we're not where we should be, and that to me would be less frustrating if I thought that we just didn't have the players on this team and it was going to be a team that needed to be solid and needed to play in transition and play off set pieces and things like that. But I think we do have the players. I think it's reasonable to ask for a little bit more from this side in terms of how they build up the play, how they create chances, and ultimately how they put the ball in the back of the net from the runner play. So, maybe it's difficult to do both of those 2 things at the same time. Maybe I'm trying to have my cake and eat it a little bit here with the defense and the attack. But I'm not asking for tiki-taka. I would just like to see a bit more purpose, a few more patterns, some more ideas in terms of how this team plays with the ball. And I think that may be needed in next summer.
Here's a question about that cake analogy. What else are you supposed to do with the cake? If it's your cake, you're obviously going to eat it too. We'll save that for another day.
The cake's gone.
Yeah, still, it's what you do with a cake. Don't let it get stale. AGR, how are you feeling about this group?
Yeah, I feel like I think there's a lot of good that's happened this year. Like I think we've learned some new players and players that I think are going to be impactful going forward. Nico Seeger, Luc de Fougerolles, those are 2 key pieces I'm excited about. Nathan Saliba has had a great year as well. The return of Ismail Kone to his best has been a great storyline. Great to see him just playing the way he has. Tajon Buchanan, we can't forget that heading into this year, there were question marks, and he returned to Tajon Buchanan's best. The emergence of Ali Ahmed, that's great. The depth of this team, Jesse Marsch said it recently in an interview. He's gone from, in his eyes, 12, 13 World Cup locks to, 25, 26. He's at the point where he's going to have to leave some uncomfortable discussions about who's not there. That's important. Like this team is deeper than ever. And I think that's good in tournament football. They defend well. I think the one frustration is just, and the attack. And I think more on the attack is just, we haven't seen as much creative solutions to try and fix the problem. I think that's been the toughest part. It's like their wheels have been spinning in the mud the last few windows, but they haven't tried anything different to get their tires out. They've just, kept revving the engine and hoping that something's going to grip, something's going to work, one goal is going to go in. And at a certain point in football, teams around you adjust. They're going to know how to stop you. And I would like to see a bit more flexibility for Canada. At the same time, I complained after the World Cup that they had no identity, and they have a very strong identity and a clear identity now. So I can't be mad that they've stuck to their identity, but that's probably the one thing I'd like to see heading into next year is just figure out some more solutions in the attack. Because otherwise it's great. Like they've still kept that, I know it's the overused word at this point. They've kept that brotherhood. You always did wonder if that would fall apart after 2023. And I think that's part of the reason why they're defending so well, why they're handling the injuries so well. But now just get some goals, and I think then they can be on the right track.
Yeah, I mean, 2025 for me, and I don't want to sound too pessimistic about it, but I found it a very frustrating year because I feel like it was more a year about discovery more so than being closer to a finished product. Because all those things that you guys mentioned, like new players coming in, finding new roles, finding solutions to some of the potential issues in the team, especially in the depth and what things may look like. I think a lot of that has been sorted. And there's many more players that if you're Marsh, you're comfortable that they can contribute. But if you look back on the year, there were 2 chances to win a trophy. Mission was not accomplished at that time. And you've been going through this year trying to navigate through it without some of your most important players or players that you feel will be those important players come the World Cup next summer. Davies, Bombito, Johnston, these are foundational players. So you're not that much closer to figuring out or understanding what the team will look like with these players in the mix and whether the same process will provide potentially a better outcome next summer with those players in the fold. And I say that because I think we're quite clear that Canada is a very difficult team to play against, and they're very difficult to beat. But, and here's the but, are they good enough to go out and win the games when they matter the most? And I don't think that we have a clear picture of what that may look like come next summer either. All right, so in terms of those players that have kind of flourished or emerged, or what things look like, has anyone's World Cup status changed in your perspective, AGR? Like, are there fringe players who are now more likely to play a more substantial role just in terms of Marsh's plans between now and next summer?
Yeah, I think of the few I mentioned, like Nico Seeger might be the most fascinating discussion right now because he's been so good at right back. We know he can do a job in midfield. What happens when everyone's available? Like at right back, like there's a chance that, he's competing with one of Alistair Johnston or Richie Larea, depending on what happens at left back. And okay, do you move Seeger into the midfield? Well, he's competing with Kone and Eustachio, who've been pretty darn good. It's with every game he plays, you're starting to get to the point where you might have to move things around. And that just shows you how far Nico Seeger has come, because there's only a few players where you'd move everything around for them. It's Alphonso Davies and Jonathan David. And I guess you put Stefan Eustachio and Tejan Buchanan into that mix. Nico Seeger, just with how good he's been, you're starting to have those thoughts. So Seeger's been probably the big winner this year. A few others, I think I mentioned earlier, it's tough because of the way the year ended for him, but Ali Ahmed really changed the discussion I found at left midfield, and will make the Alphonso Davies return discussions interesting because of what he's done there. Nathan Saliba again in the midfield. I think there's something there, and it's too bad we didn't see as much of him to end the year because he was so good at the Gold Cup and in September and October. Those are probably the 3 big winners, and I'll add Luc de Fougerolles to make it a 4. Definitely a lot of those who have improved. Otherwise, I will say this was a tough year for veterans. Like Kamal Miller, really his stock dropped significantly with all these center back additions. Jonathan Osorio has kind of gotten lost in the midfield. And even Junior Hoylett, who I feel like hasn't set a foot wrong just by all this depth that's coming around him. He's dropped to the fringes. So it's been tough for veterans, I will add.
Oliver.
Yeah, I think the big change in dynamic and in terms of like the one that's going to affect team selection and have major implications next year when other players get back healthy, or you hope you're closer to fuller strength, is Larea and Seeger. Like that is for me the question that hangs over this team with team selection right now is can you take either one of those players out, and if not, how do you get Johnston and Davies back in? I think there's a way to do it. I think there's a way to get what I feel are the 11 strongest players on the pitch right now, which would be to move Nico Seeger into midfields, to drop a striker and to play Alphonso Davies on the left wing. But that is not a way that Jesse Marsh has ever really tried or played much like during his 2 years as Canada coach. So is he going to do that 3 months out from a World Cup? I have my doubts. And so I think it's more likely that, someone who you think probably should be in the 11 isn't going to be in the 11. And Jesse Marsh is going to have to kind of live and die by those decisions. But what those two have done for sure for me has like really changed the calculation in terms of the way this team sets up.
I think we addressed that last night on our post-match reaction show. It seems like Seeger in the midfield, that might be the solution, but it's going to require a little bit of a rethink in the way that Marsh plays his team, which would then push Jonathan David forward, which I would be a big fan of. But I digress. Looking back on 2025 as a whole, I kind of touched on it, Ollie, but was it a successful year overall? Like Jesse Marsh post match has been really positive about the progress that's being made. I just wonder if you see things the same way. How do you look at 2025?
I think it's difficult to answer that question without knowing what happens in 2026. Like, if they have a good World Cup next summer, people will look back on this year and say, yeah, there was some stumbles and there were some disappointments, but it built us for the World Cup, right? And that was what the team needed. The team needed to go through that process in order to improve and get better for the World Cup. If they don't, then you're going to look back on it much more and see 2 opportunities to win a trophy that weren't taken. A very mixed end to the year, which maybe was a warning sign of things to come the following year. But without knowing what's coming, I think it's really difficult to make that assessment, to be honest. I would lean towards, I really wanted to see them win the Nations League or the Gold Cup, and I'm disappointed that didn't happen. But we all know that next summer is what matters, and that's what they'll be judged on.
Success or failure, AGR?
Well, I don't think I can call it a success yet, because like Ollie mentions, if it were to be a success, because they didn't win any trophies, it wasn't a success outright. But now we learn, like, was them losing that Gold Cup quarterfinal to Guatemala, them losing that semifinal in the Nations League to Mexico. Yes, they won the Canadian Shield, but at the end of the day, that's just a footnote in this year.
Champions.
No one will ever sing that yet. But until they play at the World Cup, we won't know how much those failures affected them. But the reality is, for all the good boxes they've ticked, there are questions of how battle tested this team is, because it's just hard. For as good as Canada have done to make the most of these friendlies, it's hard to get up for these friendlies, to care about the same way that they will at the World Cup. And that's where I really feel like the Nations League or Gold Cup were failures, because they didn't play in a final this year. I think now the reality is, this current iteration of the group has played in one final, and they were pretty thoroughly outplayed at that Nations League final. We just don't know. We don't have enough of a sample size of them in big games that I think that in its own was where I'd say it's a failure. So if you're looking at it from performances, you're looking at it from global player development, this was a good year for this Canadian team. But from a competitive standpoint, I'm left wanting more, because they didn't play in a final. I really think that Nations League in particular, yeah, they got a pretty terrible draw by getting Mexico, but Mexico's a team that at that time you just have to find a way to beat, and for them to lose the way they did, early goal, and you're just not able to break down a Mexican team that invited you to attack them all game long. That was a missed opportunity, because they could have lost in that final, and it's a different story, but at least they would have had that opportunity of playing in that final under Jesse Marsh. They haven't played in a final under Jesse Marsh, which is a missed opportunity.
Even just big games in generally, they haven't won since World Cup qualifying for 2022, right? Whether it's Nations League, whether it's Gold Cups, whether it's at the World Cup itself, like you don't have that evidence yet that they can win those matches, which obviously they're going to need to do if next summer's going to be a success.
It's just a very weird year to gauge, because clearly there's some high watermarks and some really good performances. I mean, those 2 away matches against Romania and Wales were fantastic football that they played, but then there's the caveat that was the second most important game for both Romania and Wales in that window, as they were still going through World Cup qualifying. The Davies injury and the reaction with the friction with Marsh, and then Marsh being sent, like it was just a year of ups and downs. At the end of the day, a trophy was expected, a trophy wasn't won, and we end the year with positive vibes, but still with the caveat is that this group is not quite there, not quite yet.